Hi, I'm Mitch, and welcome to the Restoration Road as we continue our series, Themes and Threads of the Holy Bible. And today we're going to talk about the major prophets. To help me do that is my good friend, Lynne Ford. Lynne, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Pretty soon we'll be Right of Malachi. That's the title of a book, Right of Malachi, Left of Matthew.
Oh, I love that.
Don't you love that?
Oh,
They're
yeah.
commentaries.
That is really...
Malachi being the last book in the Old Testament. So, yes.
That is awesome. Well, I want to talk with you first about Isaiah. Probably 700 to 681 BC by the prophet Isaiah to Judah. Talks about confrontation and hope, and hope includes the promise, the suffering servant prophesied, and exaltation.
A lot of Christmas verses.
Yes, big time. I picked a verse as a key verse, Isaiah 53:5. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. Prophesying what Jesus would do on the cross. And it's amazing that that was written probably roughly 700 years or so before that actually happened. All prophecy is fulfilled in the person of Jesus Christ, and that's the gospel message. Can you talk about the bent the skies verse again? About
he bent the sky and came down?
Yeah, David says that about God, right? He
Yes.
bent the sky and came down.
Bent the sky and came down.
I think that's such a picture of Isaiah 53:5. There's something inside each one of us that we feel like we got to justify ourselves. And Jesus addressed this right before he gives a parable. We all want to say like we've earned it, we're worthy of whatever it is that we're doing. And that includes usually this relationship with God. We want to make it religion. And so a lot of times we try to pay for our sin against a holy God. And we pursue good works, and we get on the treadmill of that. And I'm not saying good works are bad. We were designed as God's masterpiece in order to do those good works. But sometimes we get the faith in the good works backwards. It's a heart of faith, trusting in the God of the universe, that leads to those. We're not saved by good works. We're saved for good works. And so for a lot of people watching, it might be time to just receive that free payment, that gift of life from Christ, because he did it all. You used to say that Holy Week was your favorite time of year?
Lent is my favorite time of year.
And why is that?
Lent really changed a lot of things for me. I love the Easter season because it kind of is bare bones in terms of the focus on Christ. But so Lent for me set me up to really experience the joy of the resurrection and what Easter Sunday was all about. And then the other thing, because during Lent you tend to give something up, and you give up something that you're going to miss every day. So when you miss it, then it became an opportunity for prayer. And that really jump-started my prayer life. I mean, I wanted to be a woman of prayer, but it was not a habit. And because of Lent, it became a habit. So when Lent was over, I was sort of used to talking to the Lord throughout the day.
Wow.
And that was really helpful for me.
Susan heard somebody on WBCL say one time, instead of giving up something for Lent, take on someone.
Yes.
And she and I both tried that, and that really refocuses your attention when you're starting to pray for somebody, maybe somebody to surrender their lives to Christ as Savior and Lord.
One of the things that I experienced reading the prophets, the ones we're going to be talking about, I really developed such a great sense of gratitude for them. You can look at the prophets and think, oh man, the Lord spoke directly to them. I wish he would give me a very specific, marching order like he did for them. But they had a rough job.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the priests were all about the externals. They weren't necessarily delivering messages of truth to the people. The prophets, that's their job. Isaiah had to walk around naked for a few years. And, Jeremiah got to the place where he said, well, just let me die. I mean, they were people that had a message and not a happy one for the people.
Right.
The people weren't going to receive it. But in Ezekiel, God told him, deliver the message. They're not going to listen, but deliver the message. And so when we read through the prophets, I think that for me was just a takeaway, that am I willing to say yes even when the outcome is not going to be favorable as I measure what's favorable.
Yeah, that is good. That's true. Makes me think of Jeremiah that's next. Probably 627, 586 BC to Judah. Talks about the appointment, messages, judgment, pain. But Jeremiah 2:13 ties into so much to what you were saying there. He says, my people have committed two sins. They have forsaken me, the spring of living water, and have dug their own cisterns, broken cisterns that cannot hold water. Cisterns would be in Palestine at the base of a mountain range, and they would plaster it, and all the water would run down, and they would try to hold it in that cistern, but that plaster would crack, and it would seep through, and it would be kind of a swampy kind of a thing.
Because water is a precious commodity in Israel.
Huge. You've seen that firsthand.
They consider the sound of rain music.
Wow.
That's what our guide told us, that when it rains, they consider it music.
But the picture then is the cisterns are broken, and now they can't hold water. So two sins: forsaking the spring of living water, God, and then digging our own cisterns, broken cisterns that cannot hold water. So we need that flow where there's an inlet of God speaking into my life, and then an outlet. I'm now taking this into a spiritual element of where we're investing in other people, and we need that spring of living water, that there's that constant flow, an inlet and an outlet. And Christ is the source of all of those. It's interesting to me when I read that word cistern, I can't help but think of most farmhouses in rural America that had cisterns. They'd hold rainwater to be their drinking water or their bath water. Or as they started digging wells, more and more water wells, cisterns became septic tanks for people. And that's such a picture of what happens in our life when we forsake the spring of living water.
You know, the other thing too, in Isaiah and the other prophets, I mean, God spoke to them about their falling away from him, but he also spoke a lot about the way they treated orphans and widows and the poor in the land, that they were taking advantage of them, they weren't caring for them. That was a big deal to God.
It is, and Jesus made it a big deal when he walked the earth too. Same issues. Yeah, how you care for the least of these is a big deal to God. I think it ultimately shows our love for him and our love for them. Jeremiah 18:7-10, Dr. Walter C. Kaiser Jr. says these are the theme verses of all the prophets. And so I just want to read these to you. If at any time I announce that a nation or kingdom is to be uprooted, torn down, and destroyed, and if that nation I warned repents of its evil, then I will relent and not inflict on it the disaster I had planned. And if at another time I announce that a nation or kingdom is to be built up and planted, and if it does evil in my sight and does not obey me, then I will reconsider the good I had intended to do for it. Obedience, blessings, disobedience, curses. And God will grade on his measurement of justice, not on a curve. And so that's a big thing to get on the prophets. They're saying obey God. When it's not popular, obey God. Because if you don't, this isn't going to work out so well for us. Yeah, he won't forsake us. Yeah, he's going to come through with us. But we got some severe consequences coming, and it was exile, and it just wasn't a good thing. And then I just love Jeremiah 29:13. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. There's that word all again, that wholehearted devotion to God that he is seeking. What do you think the deal is of partial surrender versus full surrender in our lives? Why do we only want to surrender some? I had somebody tell me that we ought to really sing, I surrender all, the way we really mean it. Some to Jesus I surrender, some I reluctantly give.
I think a couple of things. I think we believe the lie that God is standing between us and something better.
Mm.
And even though we know that's not true, we're so deceived into
Yeah.
thinking other things because they taste good. We've experienced something from them. And the thought of giving them up, and that's why it's hard. We sort of turn back and come back and turn back and come back. I get the whole thing that Israel did. But when God woos us and he's patient and he says, give me all, test me, test me. I am all that I say that I am. You'll experience that. And the desire to follow him begins to grow. I have this, let me look up this quote that I brought because it's so important. The more we seek intimacy with the Almighty, the more almighty he becomes in our lives.
Wow.
The more we serve this God, the better we know him. And the more we know him, the more we trust him. And the more we trust him, the more we know him. And there becomes this deep, tightly knit union between the two of you that there aren't words to explain it because we don't have anything that equals it.
Right.
In our regular lives. We could say marriage, it's the closest thing we have, but even that is not fully because we're having this relationship with the eternal God. Brendan Manning said, hope your wildest hopes, dream your maddest dreams, imagine your most fantastic fantasies, where your hopes, dreams, and imagination leave off. My love begins. The God that is indescribable, that has mystery to him that we won't know because that's the tension of worshiping other, and he is other. But there's enough of that reality we have with him that says to me, like E. Stanley Jones said, I have seen you and I'm spoiled for anything else. I'm spoiled for anything else. I want that for every person listening today.
Yeah.
I want that for you. Because whatever good you have in life, a life with the Lord is that and then some. And you are set free. I cannot explain the freedom. Freedom from needing the approval of others. Freedom from needing others to tell you that your life is worthwhile. You are free in every area to simply live and love.
That's beautiful. Authenticity over the counterfeit.
Yeah.
Well, when we choose the counterfeit, we get Lamentations a little bit. Jeremiah writes about it probably 586 BC to Jerusalem. He talks about the grief expressed, the consequences, the consolation, and the perspective of the past and the present, and then the prayer for forgiveness, because that's where we'll find ourselves when we corporately or individually choose apart from God. And I like Lamentations 3:22 and 23. It's one of my favorite songs. Because of the Lord's great love, and we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. And, that's coming from a season of experiencing and desiring forgiveness after things didn't go so well because of sin.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Ezekiel.
Can I just share one more verse from this, which is just the opposite of the one that you shared in Lamentations?
Sure.
The message of Jeremiah was that the people would be taken into captivity and the temple was going to be destroyed, and nobody could believe that their temple would be destroyed and that the city of Jerusalem would be laid waste. And so he tells them that the guilt of my people, this is what God's saying, the guilt of my people is greater than Sodom. The guilt
clear.
of the Israelites, God's chosen people, greater than Sodom.
The United States of America is a country founded on honoring God, and it is flirting with disaster by taking God out of everything. And I think it's very similar. I'm not saying that that's going to happen, but you can just see the more we take God out of things, we're going to have a generation who knew him not. I mean, there's no question. It's going to take revival to change that. And maybe that will happen through our viewers especially.
But again, the promise to these same people, this is going to happen.
Yeah.
The women will eat your children, but there will be a remnant.
Yep.
And I will bring them back.
Right.
And we'll start again.
Yeah.
Because I'm faithful.
Yeah. God's faithful. We're not.
Yeah.
Ezekiel 571 BC, to Jews in Babylonian captivity, condemnation and consolation. Condemnation showing us the glory of God, the gloom of Israel, and the consolation, the judgment, hope, and the temple, a new Jerusalem. I'm going to read a couple verses from Ezekiel that I think come up a lot when people are working through things, and it's Ezekiel 36:26 through 27. I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. I will remove from you your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh, and I will put my spirit, that's capital S, in you and move you to follow my decrees and be careful to keep my laws. So many of us have hardened our hearts toward God, and we need that soft heart. And when we soften our hearts toward God, He's able to shape us like the potter shaping the clay. And there's that imagery all throughout the Old Testament, especially the prophets, of God shaping our hearts and desires to be like His, like a potter shapes the clay, and that wheel's spinning and the water's coming and it's going all over the place, and you kind of sometimes wonder how's it going to be shaped, but it's His hands on us that give us meaning. Anything on Ezekiel before I go to Daniel?
14:3, they have embraced things that led them to sin. I'm thinking in terms of, I remember when 50 Shades of Grey came out, and it became this underground reading in the church. A lot of women were reading 50 Shades of Grey and were drawn to this story of this sort of naive and innocent young woman who is drawn into this sexual relationship of a bondage with this handsome, wounded man. And women were reading it and suggesting it to other women. And I talked to a number of psychologists, like Dr. Julie Slattery, who wrote a book to women about this whole idea. Why are women reading this book that talks about, physically harming one another as a means of showing that you are devoted to one another? And she spoke very honestly about our desire to be pursued and to want to be the one and only and to belong. So, going back to how do we live our lives? Do we allow things in them that can lead us to sin? And sometimes places of sin that are so hard to come back from. The Lord can bring us back, but whether it's an addiction or whatever, sometimes the road back is just really painful and difficult. And what could get lost along the way? So Ezekiel's words are for us, that we maybe embrace something because we think it's innocent, or we just think it's, it's just kind of entertainment, or it's whatever. We have a word to describe it, not recognizing that it really is bad for us.
Man, Lynn, that's powerful. Daniel, 535 BC, captives in Babylon. The audience walks us through capture, humility, hope, and the answers. Daniel 7:14, he was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. Daniel is fascinating because it shows he's kind of like Joseph. They are very faithful to leaders in a pagan community, and then the leaders are really impacted and inspired by their faith and authenticity in the God of the universe. And there's this one time when Daniel is fasting and praying, and I think it's been 21 days, and he's done, and there's this angel taps him on the shoulder and says, "Hey, we heard you from the very beginning." And man, it's like when I read that for the first time, probably 20 some years ago, I thought, that's all I want to know, is that God hears my prayers. And in that encounter, spiritual warfare is described. And it's real. We did a show on WBCL about the beginner's guide to spiritual warfare, and you either go one way or the other. There's a demon around every corner, or that it doesn't exist and it's actually in between. But the power of prayer the power of fasting in growing our intimacy with God really got my attention. How about you? Anything on Daniel?
This verse reminds me of the one from Job, and it's very well known. It's the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're going to be thrown into the fiery furnace. So that's where this story picks up. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power. But even if he doesn't, your majesty, you can be sure that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue that you have set up." He can rescue us. Have you ever said that to the Lord? God, I know you can answer this prayer, but whatever you do, I trust you. That's what they're saying. You can rescue me, but even if you don't, I'm not turning my faith and my love and my trust to anything else.
July 1st, 1992, the IRS had raided my business. They thought we were money launderers, and we were not. And I got on my knees that night beside my bed alone and said that very thing to God. I said, look, I'm not going to make a deal with you. I know better than that. And I don't know how this will all shake out. And I really don't know what I'm asking, but I want to make my business a ministry. And probably ironically, now that it was worth little or nothing, I was willing to surrender it to God. But I said this, I said that things didn't work out with me in control the way I thought it would, or thought they would. I really kept control of my own life and put Jesus in my back pocket as a life insurance policy. And I avoided heart transformation by doing that. And I just wanted to be made new. I wanted to help other people. I didn't want to be a slave to the almighty dollar. I didn't want to be burdened by having to achieve significance every single day in my own kingdom. And I felt this weight lifted off my chest. It would be hard to describe. And I think it came from a proud heart now becoming a soft, humble heart to God first. And then that I would learn later, the next day, would be the beginning of wisdom in my life, pursuing that humility comes before wisdom, and that humility always has an object, and that object was God. And he began to restore my life. And when you're in that, I had a guy in a similar position. He's probably was 3 or 4 decades older than I am, and he was sharing it with me, and he said, I wouldn't take $1 million for that experience. He said, but I wouldn't give 10 cents to go back and live it again. And there's just something about like being in the valley like that Jesus is the only one you can turn to. And God, kind of like the Job thing, God did replenish my life, but it was a whole different way. And I know that wasn't part of the deal. I didn't try to get a bargain from him, but it was just a result of people flocking to someone who would put their needs before his own. People love that. It's interesting. Every business ought to try it. And it was for a purpose. It was for the person of God and to advance his kingdom in the hearts of others and be a carrier of his message. So that's our prayer for you, is that you would respond to the prophet's call. Their call toward obedience, God's love language. That you would submit your will to his. And you would ask him, what is your design for my life? As we talked about here today, we often want to do holdbacks. And God, I'll surrender all of this, but not this. And it becomes kind of a journey of letting go of the pieces that we hold back from God after our big surrender of our basket case of a life to him. We're here in a car museum in Auburn, Indiana. And each car is a picture of a design that reflects the design of the designer. And that's the way your life is. And when a car is restored, the owner takes it to the restorer and says, here's my basket case of a car. I can't do this, but you can. And that's what God's asking us to do with our lives to Him. Because of sin, by birth and by choice, we've fallen short. And that's left us in a basket case in many situations. But then what the restorer does is he takes the car apart piece by piece and makes each piece new again. And that's what God does with us. When we say, I can't, you can to Him, it's followed by a bunch of little I can't, you cans, little pieces that we're holding back. And then the restorer puts the classic car back together, and it's taken out to the shows, and all credit is given to the restorer. Because the car is now achieving its ultimate purpose. It's reflecting the design of the designer. So we do the same. We surrender the new to God. As He puts us back together, He wants to take us out, and He wants us to encounter other people and to be part of Him, drawing them to Himself. And we got to surrender the tragedies and the triumphs, because sometimes this car, when it goes to a show, it's going to get worn, torn, tattered, and faded. And the same thing's going to happen to us as we engage with other people. But sometimes we'll get it right, and God will shine through us. And it's our opportunity to give credit to the one who designed us, the one who made us new again. But don't ever let those tragedies stop you, because they're another opportunity to go back to the one who makes things new again. Solomon talks about in Proverbs this idea of wise counsel, about how it's sweet from a friend, but ultimately it's to discover what the Lord's teaching you. It's success from the Lord. It is absent from the wicked. It's full of deceit if you try to get wise counsel from someone who only has their interests at heart. But wise counsel is paramount to help us make wise choices in our lives. It can lead us on career changes. It can lead us in healthy relationships. It can lead us as we set the pathway of our next steps. You can learn more about wise counsel if you get your copy of Street Smarts from Proverbs and learn how to navigate through conflict to community.